Nathan, I'd like to explore whether the arts can contribute to the old chestnut of the philosophy of mind, the mind-body problem, which has obsessed me for more decades than I care to remember. And I think there are two ways to approach the question. One is the thinner way, and that says that can the arts make more rich what it means to have a mind? And the second one, which is the deeper question, which people would generally quickly come to either side of it, is whether there needs to be something other than the material, physical brain in order to make a mind. So those are two specific ways that the arts can inform or be irrelevant for the mind-body problem.
I certainly think that the arts may well be able to help us understand the facets of what we mean when we say mind. Certainly when you're talking about elements of spontaneity, right, and freedom, which are clearly an important part of the philosophy of mind discussion, you run into a specific type of spontaneity, creativity, imagination within the arts that I think is rather intriguing. And so I think whenever you're dealing in those sorts of well springs, right, they seem to have this ontological depth to them, that seem to have an underlying freedom and almost mystery to the way they percolate and move into action. I think that immediately opens up doors of a deeper sense of what on earth we mean by mind and what on earth it means to have a mind.
Continuing from that, it would seem that the creativity and the spontaneity and the surprise that may come out of the arts would at least give you a suggestion that mind is not a deterministic thing as much as you might have thought if you didn't have that.
Well, I have to admit that, my tendency when I approach the philosophy of mind is usually oftentimes dealing with certain philosophical problems. Kant seems to be, for example, pretty insistent that we need freedom in order for, the way we think about the world to make sense, right? Our moral intuitions, for example, and I'm sympathetic to those sorts of arguments. And so I do think that when you start to look at certain aspects of human experience and saying, if I need to be a free entity in order for this to make sense, we want to avoid reductionistic views of mind and so on. And I think there's something that may well be similar when you're talking about the type of spontaneity that comes into play when you're talking about creativity itself.
So mind gives you the legitimacy of adding something to the mind that makes it different from things that we think of in terms of the mechanistic world.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, that's an argument. That's a step.
Yeah.
Now, how about the next step? Can you infer from any of the arts to anything, or to make any commentary on whether the mind is strictly a manifestation of the brain and all its super complexity, or do you need something more than that? Can you go that next step? I'm not saying you're going to solve it. I'm saying, can the arts have any seat at the table of that discussion?
Well, I think exploring the possibility of whether or not the acts of spontaneity itself are in some ways mechanistically reducible to brain states or something like that may be one way of approaching that. What exactly that would look like in an experimental sense, I'm not sure, right? Not my area, not my field, but nonetheless.
But as a philosopher, you'd be able to interpret whatever results you get,
right.
or at least you try to.
Right.
That is your area.
Right, and that's where I think those questions of whether or not the findings are ultimately reductionistic, or whether or not you find the true, what we seem to experience, right? Anyone who has been involved in the arts, anybody who is an artist, has this sense of spontaneity, of creativity, of freedom, right? Being exercised, making these choices along the way. Things that are very characteristic of what the typical freedom arguments are drawing on.
Neuroscientists, many say, of course, that the freedom is an illusion
Sure.
because you think that your brain states generated precedes it. I mean, there's a lot of work and controversy. I'm
Right.
sure you're familiar with it.
Yeah, but of course, then the very same rigmarole you'd run into in terms of how philosophers and neuroscientists go back and forth about whether or not the findings are definitive to be reductionistic would then ensue with the same material.
Right, but the arts seems like if there is going to be a vehicle in the world that will untether the mind to a materialistic, physicalistic brain 100%, then the arts could be that vehicle, or a part of the vehicle.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, they defy some of the usual conditioning that might take place. It's sometimes easy enough to say, well, you choose this over this because you've habituated in certain ways, or there may be certain reductionistic explanations you can offer for what we would call a free choice, so that not all free choices seem to have the same level of freedom. But artistry, that type of spontaneity seems to always be this struggle that is almost emerging ex nihilo, right? And that's where I think it does offer some tremendous potential to explore that.
Just so I understand the explanatory arrow. You start at your most fundamental level with freedom, and that freedom would allow or give you the capability to be spontaneous, creative, innovative, surprising.
Right.
And then that fact would then lead to you can infer from that fact maybe that a non-materialistic mind is at least more likely than not.
Right.
Is that
exactly right.
Is that
well done, bravo. That's exactly right.